A stray dog stopped a robbery. You won't believe how. It was almost midnight, and I still remember how the flickering streetlight outside our convenience store created an odd dance of shadows across the sidewalk. I can't shake the image from my mind even now. A battered, limping stray dog standing on three legs, its matted fur drenched from the near-constant drizzle that soaked the city that evening. From the very first moment I saw that dog, I felt something shift in the atmosphere, like a sudden hush settling across a crowded room. There was no preamble, no warning, no cosmic sign that tonight would be different. But I felt it in my bones, the sensation that some unseen force was quietly pushing us both toward the same point in time. The dog, with those sorrowful eyes and trembling posture, had no idea it would soon become the of heroes. And I, standing behind that counter with a half-empty mug of stale coffee, had no idea my life would change irrevocably before sunrise. Yet it did, and it began with one simple turn of the doorknob. The store was nearly empty. Most nights around that hour, you'd see a trickle of customers, truck drivers, late-shift workers, and the occasional wanderer who strolled in to buy cigarettes or fill up on gas. But the storm looming over our weather forecast had kept people indoors. The rain spattered with a relentless cadence against the windows, making the interior lights hum like they were drowning under the weight of so much water. Outside, puddles formed in the potholes of the unkempt parking lot. Overhead, the sky glowed a sickly orange against the city lights. I was so tired my eyes stung. I reached for my cup of coffee just as the door opened. In walked a man wearing a tattered baseball cap pulled low over his brow. My first instinct was to greet him, but the greeting lodged in my throat. His shoulders twitched beneath a threadbare jacket, and something about the way he scanned the aisles immediately put me on edge. I tried to remind myself that I'd seen plenty of edgy-looking customers in my 3 years working there, and I always prided myself on not jumping to conclusions. Still, there was an undeniable tension in his posture. My pulse kicked up a notch when he glanced over his shoulder. Was he looking to see if anyone else was around? Was in the back room at the time, taking inventory of the stock we'd just received. When the man's gaze flicked toward me, I forced a polite smile. He nodded but didn't return the smile. No big surprise, I told myself. I saw that glint of stress in his eyes. Something about him radiated a peculiar mix of desperation and jittery energy. The way someone looks when they haven't slept for days and they have nowhere else to be. The hum of the fluorescent lights and the steady drip from the coffee machine felt too loud all of a sudden. The man moved to the snack aisle, grabbed a bag of chips, then drifted toward the fridge that held sodas and bottled water. I could feel myself exhale a little. Maybe I was overthinking. People wander in all the time, tense from the day, haunted by troubles I'll never know. Not everyone who looks nervous is a threat. Life weighs on us in different ways. I tried to refocus on the crossword puzzle I'd been half-heartedly picking at. Then, just as I'd nearly convinced myself my suspicion was baseless, the door squeaked open again. And there, standing just inside the doorway, was that stray dog. I recognized it in an instant. A scrawny creature with dirt-caked fur, ribs almost visible through its patchy coat. It had been skulking around the parking lot for the past week, occasionally rummaging through the trash near the gas pumps. We tried to chase it off once or twice, but it never went far. I'm a sucker for strays, having grown up in a neighborhood where neglected dogs were tragically common, so I'd left out a bowl of water a couple of times. Still, I never expected it to wander right into the store. Customers typically either yelled at it or ignored it, but no one had tried to coax it inside. The dog stood under the harsh fluorescent glow, its body visibly trembling. It blinked at me, ears flattened against its head, as though it was just as surprised to find itself on the inside of a convenience store as I was. I dropped the crossword puzzle, about to walk around the counter to shoo the dog back out, but something in its eyes rooted me to the spot. It looked hopeful or perhaps desperate. I couldn't place it, but a pang of empathy hit me. The dog's paw, the front left one, seemed twisted at an odd angle, a fresh injury, maybe, or an old break that had never healed right. Every breath it took appeared to cause it pain. At that exact moment, the man in the baseball cap turned from the fridge and his eyes darted to the dog. A flicker of annoyance, or was it panic, crossed his face. The dog flinched but didn't retreat. I spoke up softly. "Hey, buddy, you can't be in here. Come on," I coaxed, not wanting to startle it. I couldn't imagine what kind of day or week or life this poor animal had endured. As I inched around the counter, the man in the cap abruptly froze. In a single fluid motion, he abandoned the chips and soda he'd been holding. They clattered onto the linoleum. My stomach dropped as I watched him yank up his jacket, revealing the butt of a revolver tucked into the waistband of his jeans. My brain reeled, time slowing to a painful crawl. This was more than a routine late-night purchase. Before I could utter a word or even lunge for the silent alarm, he whipped out the gun and pointed it straight at me. "I want the money," he hissed, voice cracking like he was holding back tears. "Now." My heart was pounding so hard my ribs ached. My vision tunneled, the edges of the store darkening until all I saw was the quiver of that revolver. I forced myself to breathe, slowly raising my hands to show I wasn't going to resist. He was standing barely 10 feet away, and the dog was somewhere behind me. My thoughts flew to in the back room. Did she know what was happening? Did I have time to hit the alarm behind the register? He waved the gun again, stepping forward. "Don't even think about it. Don't push any buttons. Don't do anything stupid." His voice trembled with enough intensity that I half believed he was more frightened than I was. My mind whirled with fear, empathy, and the surreal realization that I was staring down the barrel of a loaded firearm, because of a man who, from the looks of it, had run out of options. Trembling, I stepped toward the register. "Okay," I said. "It's all right, just keep calm." My voice sounded foreign to my own ears, shaky and high-pitched. "I'll get you what you want, just don't hurt anyone." I slid the register open, the mechanical ring slicing through the suffocating silence. Bill after bill, I stacked the cash on the counter, hating how my hands shook. He let out a ragged sigh, eyes darting toward the entrance, probably worried about security cameras or potential witnesses. Then, without warning, the dog let out a low, guttural growl. I froze. The man whipped around, startled. The growl deepened into a snarl as the dog approached him, teeth bared, back hunched in a posture that screamed both fear and ferocity. "Get that dog away." The robber barked at me, pointing the gun in the dog's direction for a split second. I barely had time to react. I moved to intervene, to pull the dog back, but it stepped forward again. Nothing about this animal made sense. It was puny, injured, starved. Yet there it stood, bravely confronting a man with a gun. My heart hammered in my chest. If that dog didn't back down, it was going to get shot. "Shoo!" I hissed, my voice cracking in terror, but the dog ignored me entirely. It seemed locked onto the man in the cap, as though it recognized him as a mortal threat. The dog's entire body quivered. In the tension of that moment, something almost supernatural transpired. The dog slowly hobbled closer, every step labored, but its eyes bore into the man's as if daring him to pull the trigger. And the man's expression changed from panic to disorientation. He faltered, stepped back, muttered something I couldn't hear, and lost his grip on the bag of chips he dropped earlier. Time seemed to stutter forward. The man whipped his gun back toward me, then to the dog, then to me again, uncertain where the danger was. In that fraction of a second, I seized the chance to hit the silent alarm button hidden beneath the counter. My pulse hammered as I felt the small plastic button pressed down, and I prayed that the man didn't notice. Miraculously, he didn't. But that's when everything spiraled out of control. With a shaky curse, the robber pivoted and fired a shot at the dog. My world became a vortex of noise, confusion, and horror. There was an ear-splitting crack, the muzzle of the gun flashing bright. I screamed, covering my face instinctively. The dog yelped, the sound ripping into the air like a tortured cry. And then the dog disappeared from my line of sight behind a display rack. For a second, I thought the shot must have struck the dog's heart. The man took advantage of my stunned state to lunge over the counter, pressing the gun into my ribs. "Give me the rest," he yelled, voice frantic. But then, as if out of a nightmare, the dog reappeared, blood on its fur but still standing, and hurled its frail body straight at the man's leg, teeth sinking into the material of his pant leg. I shouted in disbelief. Who could have imagined this half-starved dog possessed such a fierce will to fight? The robber shrieked in pain, losing his balance. He flailed, trying to kick the dog away, but the dog held on with a growl that bordered on the inhuman. In those crucial moments, the man's finger tightened on the trigger, but as he fell, the bullet went wide, shattering a rack of candy bars. Without thinking, I grabbed a heavy flashlight from behind the register and brought it down on the man's arm. He dropped the gun with a clatter. The dog released his leg, staggering backward, the tension draining from its body. The man scrambled for the weapon, but I slammed my foot on it. His eyes widened in pure panic. He lunged at me, fists swinging, but I managed to dodge, adrenaline surging. That's when burst out of the back room, brandishing the store's broom. She screamed at the top of her lungs, swinging wildly, knocking the man to the floor again. He swore, coughed, struggled to rise, but by some miracle, the sirens were already approaching outside. The silent alarm had worked, and the police had arrived far faster than I ever dreamed possible. The man froze, eyes darting to the doors. Red and blue lights lit up the front windows like a strobe show. He made one last desperate attempt to claw his way free, but I still had my foot on the gun and grabbed him by the back of his jacket, yanking him away from the counter. In that swirl of confusion, sirens wailing, lights flashing, glass doors swinging open, the cops rushed in, their weapons drawn. The robber had nowhere to go. He raised his hands and they tackled him to the ground, pinning him with terrifying efficiency. And then, as if a giant hand had pressed pause on the chaotic scene, everyone seemed to notice the dog. It stumbled a few steps, whined, and collapsed onto the floor, panting hard, blood matting the fur near its shoulder. The next minutes blurred into a whirlwind of questions, statements, paramedics, and concerned onlookers. I was kneeling beside the dog, tears burning my eyes as I watched its chest heave. I barely registered the policeman taking my statement. I just kept stroking the dog's head, whispering, "Stay with me, buddy. Please, don't die." Hovered over us, one hand on my shoulder, the other covering her mouth. She looked as if she might faint. The dog's eyes flicked up to me, and there was a wet, rattling sound in its throat. My heart twisted painfully. How could a creature so clearly mistreated, hungry, and hurt have the strength, or the will, to save us like that? How did it even know it could do something so heroic? The paramedics arrived, checking us for injuries. They confirmed that the bullet had grazed the dog's shoulder, but the wound looked deep enough to require stitches. The dog was trembling from shock, eyes half-lidded. We had no animal ambulance or on-call vet on the scene, so I immediately asked one of the officers if they could help me transport the dog to an emergency vet clinic. He looked taken aback but quickly agreed, radioing in to see if any of their vehicles could transport an injured dog. Another officer, a kind-faced woman with a clipped ponytail, offered her personal car. Without hesitation, I scooped the dog into my arms, gingerly, mindful of its injured shoulder, and climbed into the passenger seat of that police cruiser. Stayed behind to finish giving statements and lock up the store, but she squeezed my hand, tears shining in her eyes, and whispered, "Call me the second you know anything." The drive to the emergency vet seemed endless, though it couldn't have been more than 10 minutes. Rain hammered the roof, sliding down the windshield in thick sheets. The dog lay in my lap, whimpering quietly, its eyes rolling back with every bump in the road. "You're going to be okay," I repeated, though I wasn't sure if it was more for my benefit or the dog's. My heart felt like it was lodged in my throat. I'd never been so invested in a stray dog, Never felt so fiercely protective of a creature I hardly knew. But something about that dog's willingness to stand up to a gunman broke me wide open. I needed it to live. I needed it to have a chance at the life it deserved. We arrived at the 24-hour veterinary clinic, a modest building with flickering neon above the door. The officer helped me carry the dog inside, where a sleepy-eyed veterinarian and a night tech rushed to assist. They whisked the dog onto a metal examination table, already preparing an IV and a sedative. I stood off to the side, cold dread coiling in my gut, trying not to let my tears fall. It seemed like forever as they cleaned the wound, administered medications, and checked for further injuries. The police officer lingered in the waiting area, tapping out notes on her phone and occasionally glancing my way with sympathetic eyes. After what felt like an eternity, the vet, Dr. Saunders, stepped over and spoke softly. "The bullet grazed the shoulder but didn't shatter bone," she explained. "There's muscle damage and a lot of blood loss, and the dog's extremely malnourished. We're going to suture the wound, keep it on fluids. It may need surgery if there's more internal damage, but I think we got here in time." My knees nearly buckled with relief. So there's hope. Yes, but it'll be touch and go for a while. The infection risk is high. And this dog's condition is, well, it's not good. It's been out on the streets a while from the look of it. I nodded, tears finally slipping free. I didn't bother wiping them away. "Can I stay with him tonight?" I asked. "Doctor." Saunders hesitated. "Normally, we don't allow visitors to remain after hours in the back, but given the circumstances, yes, I'll let you stay in the waiting area if you need to. And you can check on him once we have him stabilized." I murmured a grateful thank you, my entire body shaking with fatigue and leftover adrenaline. The officer approached, gently resting a hand on my shoulder. "We need to wrap up the incident report, but you can do that here if you're up for it. Then I'll give you a lift home, unless you plan on staying." I looked down the hallway to the back room, where they'd wheeled the dog for further care. "I'd like to stay for a bit," I said, uncertain if that would cause trouble. The officer nodded, her expression soft. "All right, I'll stay too and we'll get your statement. Just let me know when you're ready." So that's how the surreal, early hours of the morning went. Me slumped in a stiff plastic chair, filling out forms, recounting the robbery in detail. By now the storm outside had ratcheted up a notch, thunder cracking the sky. I replayed the moment in my mind 100 times. The dog's determined leap, the robber's panicked expression, the deafening shots. My breath caught every time I pictured the bullet striking the dog. When everything was settled, the kind-faced officer headed out, promising to stop by if she needed anything else, and urging me to call if I had any updates on the dog. Meanwhile, Dr. Saunders peered into the waiting room. "He's out of surgery. The wound wasn't too complicated, but we had to remove a small fragment. He'll need a few stitches and some close monitoring. He's sedated now, resting comfortably. You can go see him if you'd like." It was past 3 in the morning when I finally tiptoed into the small recovery room. The lights were dim, medical equipment humming softly. My eyes landed on the battered body of the dog, an IV line in his paw, bandages around his shoulder, and a small machine beeping nearby. He looked so small, so fragile. Gingerly, I laid a hand on the uninjured part of his flank, feeling the slow, rhythmic rise and fall of his breathing. It was a miracle he was alive, a miracle that he'd had the courage to stand between me and a bullet. A wave of gratitude and guilt washed over me. He shouldn't have had to do that. He deserved better than life on the streets, scrounging for food, taking on the role of protector in a world that had abandoned him. I whispered, "Thank you," my voice trembling. "Thank you for saving me." The dog didn't stir, lost in the haze of sedation and painkillers. But as I stood there, a fierce determination took root in my heart. I would not let this dog go back to the streets. However it ended, however long it took, I was going to fight for him as fiercely as he'd fought for me. The next few days were a blur of readjusting to normal life while juggling my concern for the dog. Covered a few of my shifts, insisting I focus on recuperating from the shock. I visited the dog, who the vet had temporarily labeled Hero, a placeholder name, every day. At first, he was too weak to stand. His eyes would open, but he barely lifted his head. The staff was worried about infection, dehydration, and the myriad of other complications that could arise from the bullet wound, combined with his malnourished state. Nevertheless, something astonishing happened. Each time I visited, each time I spoke softly or let him sniff my hand, he seemed to relax. Bit by bit, he'd accept a gentle pat, a slow scratch behind the ears. By the fourth day, he managed to sit up, albeit shakily. Dr. Saunders would occasionally pop in to check on him, smiling at me with a mix of professional pride and personal admiration. "You know," she said one morning as I fed Hero a bit of soft dog food from my hand, "it's pretty remarkable how quickly he's improving. If you'd like to keep him, we can talk about adoption once he's stable enough to leave. I assume that's what you want." I felt a lump in my throat, tears threatening to spill again. "I do," I managed. I already feel so connected to him. I mean, he saved me. I can't just let him go back out there." She nodded, resting a hand on my shoulder. "I admire that, but remember, it's a big commitment. He'll have ongoing vet care for a while, especially with that old injury to his paw. We'll need to see if anything can be done to correct it, or at least manage the pain." "I'll do whatever it takes," I replied firmly, surprising myself with how certain I sounded. At that moment, it hit me that maybe I needed a hero as much as he needed me. In the wake of the robbery, I'd been wrestling with nightmares, anxiety, and a sense of vulnerability. But just being around Hero, seeing his courage, reminded me that hope was possible even in the bleakest circumstances. At times, I questioned the entire sequence of events. Why had the dog stepped into the store at that exact moment? Why had it singled out the robber as a threat instead of cowering or running away? Perhaps it was just a frightened reaction, a cornered animal snapping at someone it perceived as dangerous. Or maybe, on some higher, ineffable level, the dog sensed what was at stake, sensed the fear in my heart. I'd lie awake in bed, replaying the robbery, imagining alternative scenarios where the dog never showed up, and the endings to those scenarios always ended in tragedy. The dog had made the difference, and I couldn't forget that, not for a second. The media got wind of the story within a day or two. One of the local officers must have shared details with the press. Soon, a local news crew arrived at the store, wanting to interview me, and we were uneasy about it, but the store manager figured the publicity might help business. So there I was, standing under the harsh glow of a camera light, recounting how a brave stray dog saved us all. They asked me how it felt to stare down a gun barrel, how it felt to watch the dog get shot, and I did my best to convey the gratitude and awe I felt. But it was awkward, bearing such a raw experience to strangers. The next day, the news station ran the story with the headline, "Stray Dog Stops Robbery in Daring Late-Night Showdown." It circulated on social media, prompting an outpouring of comments. People from all over the city, and even beyond, sent messages praising the dog's heroics, offering donations to help with vet bills. It was surreal. Despite the attention, I tried to keep my focus on Hero's recovery. Another day passed, then another, until finally Dr. Saunders cleared him to go home, with strict instructions for daily wound care, medication, and follow-up appointments. My tiny studio apartment suddenly became the new in Hero's fight to regain his health. I dragged in a soft dog bed, set up water bowls, and carefully blocked off a corner near the space heater so he could rest without too much disturbance. Bringing him home was nerve-wracking. His eyes darted around, taking in the unfamiliar environment. For a moment, I worried he might try to run, or that he wouldn't trust me enough to let me guide him through the new space. But as soon as I coaxed him onto the bed, he curled up with a tiny sigh of relief, like he recognized that this was his safe spot. I sat with him on the floor, letting him sniff my hands, gently petting his head. He seemed more at peace than I'd ever seen him. Yet there were still nights when Hero would wake me with mournful whimpers. I'd find him trembling, eyes wide, as though reliving the terror of that gunshot. Each time, I'd kneel beside him, stroke his ears, and murmur gentle reassurances until he settled. It broke my heart. I realized that while he'd saved me, he too was grappling with the trauma of that night, and probably the traumas of his entire life before that. We were healing together, visited frequently, bringing toys, treats, and a cheerful spirit that made Hero wag his tail weakly. He was still too thin, too fragile, but at least he wagged his tail, a sign of hope if ever there was one. Eventually, the store manager gave us both a few days off, telling us to take care of yourselves before coming back. That was a welcome reprieve. There were endless vet appointments, physical therapy sessions to help rehabilitate the dog's injured paw, and at-home tasks like cleaning the wound and administering antibiotics. The routine felt exhausting and yet strangely fulfilling. Meanwhile, the investigation into the robber's background continued. I learned that he was a local man named, down on his luck, struggling with an eviction, gambling debts, and a child in need of medical treatment he couldn't afford. It didn't excuse what he did, but it cast a tragic lens on his desperation. I wrestled with conflicting emotions. He had almost killed me, killed Hero, but he was also a father, a man who believed he had no other way to save his child. The more I thought about it, the less I could label him a monster, and the more I recognized him as another victim of cruel circumstances. Nonetheless, the legal system would handle his case, and I had my own life to sort out. A sense of celebrity lingered around Hero. People online started calling him Guardian, Bravest Pup, and the Robbery Stopper. Someone even set up a crowdfunding page for his medical bills, which soared as the days turned into weeks. Donations poured in, small and large. I was overwhelmed by the generosity. Because of it, I was able to not only keep Hero in top-notch care, but also ensure a long-term plan for his rehabilitation. We arranged for more specialized vet visits, looking into surgery to correct his old paw injury. For once in his life, it seemed everything was going in Hero's favor. You might think that would be the end of the story, that it would fade out in a sweet montage of Hero getting stronger, me returning to normal, and the world moving on to the next headline. But fate wasn't done with us yet. One bitterly cold afternoon, about 3 weeks after the incident, I was walking Hero with a specialized harness that helped support his weaker front leg. The day was crisp, the sky an immaculate blue, but my breath formed puffy clouds in the air. Hero moved gingerly on the sidewalk, occasionally lifting his nose to sniff at. His fur, though still patchy, was noticeably cleaner and healthier. He seemed almost proud to strut along, as if relishing this second chance at life. We turned a corner, and that's when I heard a shout. Across the street, a car had swerved onto the sidewalk, tires screeching. It slammed into a lamppost, the front end crumpling like tin foil. Horrified pedestrians cried out, backing away. Smoke or steam hissed from under the hood. My pulse jumped. Without thinking, I started to rush forward. Hero tugged at the leash, caught off guard, but then followed my lead as fast as his limp would allow. People were scrambling to see if the driver was hurt. I made it to the driver's side window, seeing a woman slumped over the steering wheel, her eyes rolled back. Another bystander was already calling 911, but the door was locked, and none of us could force it open. Panic squeezed my chest. The woman inside looked unconscious, maybe having a seizure or a stroke. We had no idea. I tried the passenger door, locked as well, but the window was slightly cracked, just enough for a small hand to reach in. One of the bystanders, a man with strong arms and a determined gaze, kicked at the window. It splintered. Another bystander reached through to unlock the door, shards of glass scraping his jacket. We yanked it open. The woman inside was unresponsive. I leaned in, fumbling to check for a pulse. Hero barked incessantly, pulling on his leash as though urging us to hurry. We carefully pulled the woman out, laying her on the ground. She was breathing but shallowly. Her lips were turning a worrying shade of blue, and I realized she might not be getting enough oxygen. The bystander on the phone with 911 relayed the instructions from the operator. Check her airway, begin CPR if necessary. My mind reeled. This was exactly the kind of emergency training I'd studied in first aid classes but never thought I'd actually need. I positioned her on her back, tilted her chin up, and checked for obstructions. Another bystander started compressions when she stopped breathing. I was terrified. Hero barked again, pawing at my leg as though he sensed how dire the situation was. The man performing compressions looked at me. "I'm losing the rhythm. You know how to do rescue breaths?" he asked in desperation. I swallowed my fear. "Yes," I answered, my voice coming out steadier than I felt. We switched positions. He guided me to maintain the correct count while I delivered breaths. A lifetime seemed to pass in those frantic moments. We alternated, praying for sirens to arrive. Hero's barking was near constant, echoing in my ears like a metronome urging us not to give up. Then, miraculously, the woman coughed, her eyes flickering open. I almost cried with relief. Paramedics roared onto the scene, quickly taking over. We stepped back, my chest heaving, arms trembling from adrenaline and fear. The bystanders drifted away as professionals stabilized the woman, loaded her onto a stretcher, and prepared to whisk her off to the hospital. One of the paramedics glanced at me. "You saved her life," he said simply. I looked down at Hero, who had finally stopped barking and now leaned gently against my leg, as if exhausted by the tension. Tears filled my eyes. "We all did," I murmured. But in a strange, poetic way, I felt Hero was the one who ignited that sense of urgency. His bark had spurred me to action more than any moral code. It felt like he was telling me not to stand by, that we had to pay forward the life he'd been given. The paramedics left. Slowly, the crowd dispersed, and I found myself staring at the twisted, empty car. The lamppost was bent at a precarious angle. It dawned on me how quickly tragedy can strike, how fragile we all are. Over the next few weeks, the near-daily routine of caring for Hero continued. We approached his final checkup for the bullet wound. The day before the checkup, I got a surprising phone call. It was from a local nonprofit that assisted veterans with PTSD by pairing them with service animals. They'd heard about Hero's story. Apparently, a friend of a friend had seen the news coverage and mentioned my dog. They wanted to gauge my interest in letting Hero train alongside me as a therapy dog, not just a pet, because of his extraordinary resilience and temperament. "He's the kind of dog who can bring hope to others," the representative said. "We could help cover further vet expenses, and in exchange, we'd love to give you some training so you can bring him to hospitals or community centers." I was stunned. The idea of Hero becoming a therapy dog was simultaneously inspiring and daunting. I thought about it for a long moment, recalling how he'd responded to the crashed car, how he barked to rally my focus, or how in the store he'd risked everything to protect me from that gunman. If any dog had the spirit to bring comfort and courage to those in need, it was him. So, with a leap of faith, I agreed. That decision marked the beginning of yet another chapter in our shared journey. The training sessions were intense and required patience. Hero had trust issues, especially around sudden noises or movements reminiscent of the robbery. But the trainers were patient, using positive reinforcement and gentle techniques that helped him realize he was safe. Over time, the bullet wound healed into a small, hairless scar on his shoulder. His limp from the older paw injury remained, but it never stopped him from trying. In fact, the trainers praised his determination, calling him one of the bravest dogs they'd ever seen. I continued working at the convenience store, though my shifts varied to accommodate our training schedule. And I remained close, often reminiscing about the night of the robbery, marveling at how that single event had set a chain reaction of good in motion. The fear of that night never fully left us. I still startled at loud noises, and I could see in his eyes that she carried the memory of that gun pointed at us. but we also found a renewed appreciation for life's fragile beauty. If a battered stray dog could stand up to a bullet, if a random group of strangers could unite to save a woman in a crashing car, then maybe, just maybe, hope was more abundant than we'd ever realized. As the months passed, Hero's story continued to resonate. Occasionally, local schools invited me to speak about him, to teach children about compassion for animals and the importance of never giving up. Hero would tag along, tail wagging, letting the kids pet him gently. He'd endure 1,000 sticky hands with patient stoicism, his deep brown eyes brimming with a sweetness I hadn't known was possible. More than once, I watched a child on the brink of tears transform into giggles at Hero's gentle nuzzles. He also started accompanying me to a veterans rehab center, where men and women dealing with physical injuries and emotional traumas had therapy sessions. Hero would sit calmly at their feet, sometimes resting his chin on someone's knee, as if to say, "I understand. You are not alone." The effect was remarkable. Patients who rarely opened up began to speak more freely, possibly encouraged by the presence of a dog who knew pain and recovery firsthand. One day, as we left the rehab center, a middle-aged veteran in a wheelchair called out to me. "Miss," he said, clearing his throat as I turned, "that dog of yours, he sure got spirit. Reminds me a bit of me, back when I was in the desert." I smiled, pushing Hero's harness gently so he'd walk closer to the man. The veteran reached down to pat Hero's head. "He lost a bit of himself," the man continued, "just like I lost part of me. But seeing him keep on living, loving it, it helps." My eyes stung with tears. "That's exactly what he does," I whispered, swallowing hard. The man's gaze lingered on Hero's scar. "Thank you for bringing him," he said simply. I knew at that moment that all the struggle, the sleepless nights, the vet bills, the stressful training sessions, was worth it. Hero's presence was a living testament that no matter how deep the wound, healing was possible, and that sometimes, in the darkest moments, help comes from the most unexpected places. Sometime later, with the blessing of the rehab center staff, we organized a small event. We invited local families, children with special needs, veterans, anyone who might benefit from a day of positivity. Hero was the highlight, hobbling around, wagging his tail at every new face. We set up small stations, reading corners for kids to practice reading books aloud to Hero, quiet areas for veterans to sit with him if they felt anxious. Brought homemade cookies. The store manager, who had grown uncharacteristically sentimental about Hero, donated drinks and snacks. It was a modest gathering, but it had heart. The day soared by, filled with laughter and gratitude. People came up to me, recounting how they'd heard about the robbery, about how the dog had saved the day, and how inspired they were. In the midst of that gathering, Dr. Saunders dropped by, her eyes lighting up at the sight of Hero. "He looks amazing," she said, crouching to rub behind his ears. "Incredible recovery. He's not the same dog I treated that night." I smiled, tears threatening. "He's even better. He's a hero, and not just because he stopped a robbery. He's a hero because he never gave up, even when life dealt him every hard card possible." That night, exhausted from the event, Hero and I returned to my apartment. I prepared his dinner, vet-approved kibble with a bit of chicken, and then settled onto the couch. Hero eased himself onto the cushions next to me, resting his head on my thigh. My mind replayed the day. The warm smiles, the heartfelt thanks, the glimpse of hope in the eyes of wounded souls. And suddenly I recalled that fateful night at the convenience store, the lonely hush, the trembling dog appearing in the doorway, the desperate robber's gun. It struck me how that single moment, so terrifying at the time, paved the way for everything else. Hero's rescue, his healing, the new friendships formed, the hearts he'd touched. I turned to look at Hero's face, softly lit by the reading lamp. His eyelids drooped, exhaustion washing over him. A wave of emotion hit me, and I bent to kiss the top of his head. "Thank you," I whispered, voice trembling. "Thank you for coming into my life." He gave a half-asleep snuffle, shifting closer. his body warm against me. In the quiet of my living room, with the hum of the heater in the background, I felt the profound bond that had formed between us. There are moments in life that stay with you forever, that carve out a new shape in your heart. For me, it was that moment in the store, when the dog appeared in the doorway, vulnerable and afraid, yet impossibly brave. That was the beginning of a story I never could have predicted, one that changed not only my life, but the lives of so many others who glimpsed hope in Hero's transformation. Even now, the memory of the robbery still sends a chill through me. There are nights I wake up in a cold sweat, imagining the echo of gunshots. But then I feel Hero's steady breathing beside me. I remember how he refused to cower when it mattered most, and I find strength in his example. His shoulder is a testament to courage, his limp a reminder that scars don't define us, they refine us. What happened next, as our lives moved on, was a gentle unfolding of day-to-day routines colored by gratitude. My neighbors, once indifferent to strays, started leaving out water bowls or donating food to local shelters. People recognized Hero when I walked him, kids squealing with delight as they told their parents, "It's the dog from the news." And I found a deeper sense of purpose in our work, greeting customers with renewed warmth, refusing to let fear or cynicism settle in. We'd laugh together after shifts, remarking on how we used to dread the monotony of midnight hours, and how a single night changed everything. Over time, the news cycle moved on. Another big story took center stage, and the hype around the robbery-stopping dog faded from headlines. But Hero's influence remained in smaller, quieter ways. The clerk at our local grocery store once told me that when she felt overwhelmed by life, she'd remember how Hero, injured and hungry, leaped into danger to save someone else. "If that dog can be brave, so can I," she said, handing me my receipt with a shaky smile. And every time I saw a battered stray wandering the streets, my heart twisted, and I'd find a way to call animal rescue or offer a scrap of food. Small ripples of change spreading outward. On a crisp autumn afternoon, nearly a year after the robbery, Hero and I joined a local 5K charity walk to raise awareness for rescue animals. The route meandered through a city park blazing with colorful leaves. Hero wore a little around his neck that read, "I was rescued, and I rescued." People snapped photos, came up to pet him, and asked about our story. I recounted it so many times that day my throat went raw. But each time, I felt a flicker of warmth in my chest, remembering how lucky we were to still be standing, breathing, sharing our story. At the end of the walk, we stood on a small stage with a microphone, addressing the crowd. My heart pounded as I took the mic, Hero sitting at my feet, tail wagging. I spoke from a place of unguarded emotion. Sometimes we think heroes are perfect, shiny, unblemished. But that's not true. Heroes can be broken, hungry, and terrified. Heroes can walk on four legs with a limp, as long as they have the heart to do what's right. This dog saved my life in the most unexpected way. And I'm hoping our story reminds each of you that compassion and courage can come from anywhere, even from the stray on the corner you might overlook. We all have the power to be that stray dog for someone else, to show up in their darkest hour, to love even when love seems impossible. A hush fell over the crowd. Then someone started clapping, and soon everyone joined in. Hero looked around with wide eyes, as if unsure what the fuss was about, but I ruffled the fur on his neck, whispering how proud I was of him. As the applause swelled, I felt tears slipping down my cheeks, the moment swelling with a mix of gratitude, awe, and humble acceptance of how incredible life's twists can be. That evening, alone in my apartment, I curled up with Hero. He gave a contented sigh, settling his chin on my lap. I caught a glimpse of the scar on his shoulder, the same scar that had once bled all over a convenience store floor. I thought about the what-ifs, how easily that night could have ended in tragedy, how the bullet might have struck me, how the robber could have panicked further, how Hero might have died on the spot. But it didn't. We both made it out, changed forever, banded together by some unspoken bond forged in the crucible of crisis. And that's the moment I realized. The reason people share this story, the reason it goes viral, the reason it touched hearts far and wide, isn't just because a dog stopped a robbery. It's because of what that act symbolizes. It's the embodiment of hope, the proof that courage can appear in the least likely of forms. It's the reminder that we're all connected, that no life is too small or broken to make a monumental difference. It's a testament to the quiet, miraculous ways we can save one another when we dare to look past our own fear. So, here we are, Hero and me, continuing forward. We're not famous anymore, not exactly, but that's okay. We don't need the spotlight. We have each other. We have a deeper sense of what it means to be alive. And we have this lingering faith in the goodness that can flourish when we stand up for one another. Sometimes I'll still catch Hero gazing at me with those deep brown eyes, and in that gaze, I see something that looks suspiciously like gratitude. Or maybe it's just a reflection of my own. Either way, we share an understanding that defies words. We survived. We fought for each other. And in that bond lies the seed of every act of love we'll ever commit. Perhaps someday, if you're lucky, you'll catch a glimpse of a ragged stray dog on a rainy night and you'll remember this story. Maybe you'll think twice before dismissing that dog as just another lost cause. You never really know who, or what, can become your savior at the most unexpected time. And that, more than anything, is why this story lives on, retold around dinner tables, at classrooms, on social media posts that spark tears and awe. Because we all yearn to believe that even the most forsaken creature can rise to the occasion, that beneath every scar lies a potential hero waiting to shine. And that is exactly what happened on that stormy night in the convenience store. A stray dog, half-starved and limping, stepped into the path of a robber's gun and changed the course of countless lives. You might call it coincidence or fate or divine intervention. But in the end, those labels don't matter. What matters is that it happened, and the ripples continue to spread. I'm still in awe of that fact, still grateful for every second I share with Hero. Because sometimes, all it takes is one act of bravery to reveal to the world that miracles don't always come in the form we expect. Sometimes they come with matted fur, trembling legs, and a heart far bigger than anyone could have imagined. And when they do, they remind us all, hope is never lost and love, against all odds, can save us in the most unthinkable way.